Okay, with me today is the senior advisor at HillStaffer and DarConte. Anne, welcome.
Thank you, Mike. It's good to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, look, I want to start by talking about the more than 30 years that you've spent in the advocacy and government relations world. We could spend an entire we could create a dedicated video to talk about everything you've accomplished on behalf of your clients and your employers, as well as all of the time and effort you've invested advancing women in the government relations profession. But I just wanted to start by having you talk for a few minutes about the amazing journey you've had through the advocacy profession and what you're up to currently.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate your kind remarks. It's been a long journey, and I would say that if you asked me if I ended up where I originally started out, I would say no. But I think that's the best part about the journey. I started out basically with a political science major, and I was working in a communications field with a graphic design and communications agency. And then I made a geographical move. And in order to get started, I started working on some state campaigns. And before you know it, I ended up working for the Florida legislature while I was going to graduate school. And I had an internship and then was hired full time and then ran a couple of campaigns there. Went to a law firm and did lobbying from that standpoint. Then I came to DC and I worked for a government relations software firm, then for a major corporation, and then for some trade associations. And along the way, I recognized that government relations was more than just that singular silo, and that it was really important for us to be able to see the bigger picture of a corporate or an association environment in order to best serve the government relations and advocacy needs of the organization. Therefore, I pursued my CAE, my Certified Association Executive credential. And as far as the women piece goes, along the way, I've been in leadership roles for different women's organizations on boards of directors for Women in Government Relations, PLEN, the Public Leadership Education Network, and I'm also a co-founder of the Professional Women in Advocacy Conference, as well as Professional Women in Advocacy Annual Awards. So always tried to help women along the way. And I think one of the things I've learned, probably biggest lesson, is that it's not just what the younger folks get from us, but it's what we continue to learn from them, because we've had to adapt during the course of our career to technology and other changes. So that's about the size of it.
So right, I mean, that's an amazing career. And as you've gone through each of your experiences there, I think it's important that you've laid out, you've had experience on, working in a state legislature and then coming over to our side as a consultant, working not only for advocacy organizations and running advocacy programs, but also getting to experience that lobbying piece of it and kind of seeing how all these components can fit together, as you said. And so that, of course, leads me to today's question, which, given your description, you are the perfect person to answer. And so today's question is, how can an advocacy program make an organization's lobbying and public affairs program more effective?
It's a question that I have thought of a lot during my career, Mike, so thank you for asking it. I think it really boils down to a couple of mistakes that many organizations make. One is that when this goes for whether they're a public organization or a private organization, whether they're a for-profit or a not-for-profit, I would say that most organizations, when they think about government relations, think about lobbying. And government relations and lobbying are not by any stretch of imagination equivalent. Lobbying is but a single tactic that you can use to have an effective government relations program. If lobbying is all you're doing, then you can do better. Advocacy is actually much bigger. I think some people also think advocacy is grassroots and grass tops programs, whereas advocacy is really about the mission of the organization. It's about pushing your product, your service, or your cause, and making sure that you're arguing. And I don't mean to argue in the negative sense. I mean it impacting with your words and your actions to promote the cause or the product or the service that you are responsible for promoting. And there are so many ways that that can be done. Government relations is just one of them. And in government relations, it includes setting up the appropriate strategy that is consistent with the strategic direction of the organization and the strategic goals of the organization. And then it is about laying down the tactics that will help you do that. And as I said earlier, lobbying is but one tactic. But I would highly recommend that people are out in the community talking to their identified stakeholders, those who both love them and those who may not know them, as well as even sometimes those who may not like them. Sometimes helping people understand what they don't understand can be effective. It's using grass tops and grassroots opportunities, not just when it's about an issue or a piece of legislation or a regulation, but when it's about talking about recent statistics about your sales, recent statistics about your product, recent statistics or developments about your cause or the disease or whatever it is that you are trying to promote and problem that you're trying to solve. And of course, always using the communications of social media as well as traditional media. Bottom line is advocacy is a relationship-based business, and it's not just about relationships with legislators and staffers. It's about relationships with stakeholders that can be found often in places people neglect to look.
Yeah, that's an incredible set of points you just went through there. The other thing I wanted to get your thought on this as well, because I know you and I have a lot of the same conversations with clients, particularly picking up on your last point there in terms of the importance of relationships and really not knowing issue to issue, right? Like which relationship is going to be the most important or kind of that key relationship that helps you get to where you want to go to, right? So ultimately, over the long term, you have a government relations program or a public affairs program, and you're looking to build relationships across that, across that legislative body with regulators and so on. And so then circling back to this point on how it works together with lobbyists, right? For the vast majority of organizations, I think certainly the vast majority of nonprofit organizations, there's just a practical budgetary limitation on just using lobbying, right? Like it gets relatively expensive pretty quick, right? If you want to hire lobbyists to be able to get you into every one of these offices that you need to influence over time, right? So I always try to kind of make the more practical point of there is an issue of scale here, and what gets you those relationships built, I think, better and stronger over time is investing in the advocacy program where you have grassroots and grass tops in these legislative districts, building the relationships that then support your organization and your organization's issues over that long term.
You're absolutely right. And frankly, it's probably one of the biggest mistakes organizations that don't have a lot of resources make in hiring a lobbying firm, because their issue may not be ripe for lobbying. And what they've then done is spent a lot of money on a lobbyist who says at the end of the year, renew my contract. I think next year is the year. And the fact is, That gets down to the real crux. That's not saying lobbyists are bad people. I'm a lobbyist, but I have to recognize that government relations, advocacy, and public policy is about so much more than lobbying. Again, a lobbyist is just one portion of what makes a successful program. And oftentimes, it's not nearly at the top of the list of the things that can be done to promote your issue, nor is it necessarily, in fact, it often is not the thing that gets done in year one, maybe not even in year two.
Yeah.
It's more important to build a base of support with potential stakeholders who may or may not be legislators. And frankly, before hiring a lobbyist, the organization itself should be developing relationships with those legislators. And that can be done by using their members who are the constituents. Let's face it, I can tell you in my world, for a major corporation, in fact, the largest in the world in this particular industry, on a congressional issue, we had one of our lobbyists come back and spoke to a congressman. The congressman said, I am with you and I agree with you, but I haven't heard from the district. I haven't heard from my constituents. And this was a person who was very friendly to our issues. So what we did is we got our people ginned up, and within 3 hours, not a staffer, but the member of Congress himself picked up the phone, and his words were, "Call off the dogs." And it was his way of saying, "Thank you. I now know where my constituents are, and you've given me the cover on a controversial issue to support you," which I wanted to do anyway, but I needed to make sure this is where my constituency was. So there's so much value that can give a major return on investment that is much higher than the dollar spent on lobbying. So for those looking for a cost-efficient and effective way of being advocates, don't start with a lobbying firm. Start with a true consultant who understands the bigger picture and is willing to say, let's get you perfectly positioned before we pull out the lobbying guns.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that's spot on. And I think the other point that you were making there is often missed by organizations, which is when you hire the lobbyist, they are going to be most effective, or really probably can't be effective unless the legislator is back, whether it's in DC, in the state capitol, you're in session, right? I mean, that's really where you get your value out of your lobbying spend, right? But what you described in the first part of your answer to this question is the need for organizations, particularly those that are just starting out, to be building their relationships, be building their brand, be advocating for their organization all the time, right? So you have this constant need to be out there, but yet your lobbyist is going to be most effective or only effective when that legislator is back doing their jobs in the state capitol or in DC, right? So how do you then bridge that gap between, okay, you're investing in a lobbying firm to build relationships in a really specific set of circumstances at a specific time, but yet you have this need to be up and running all the time, communicating your message. And that's the spot where advocacy really fits in well to make sure that that message is being delivered consistently. And to the point that you just made about that legislative issue, right, is that ideally you've been making your point to that member of Congress all along the way, right? So when crunch time hits, they already have that cover that they need because the investment's been made all along all along the way.
That is true. You know, it's really no more complex, I should say, than the basics of communication. Communication is about a message. It's about developing the right message to convey the argument or the promotion of the issue that you're trying to promote. Then it's about who the messenger is. The messenger doesn't necessarily need to be a lobbyist. It can be one of many people, and it can be in multiple venues also. And then it's also who is the recipient of the message. At certain points in time, legislators are the appropriate message recipients, but at other points in time, there are other constituencies that need to be built And they need to be the message people, because even if the session is starting in a week and you haven't primed your pump with that issue, you can go talk to as many legislators as you want. This may not be the right time for your issue. So it's absolutely critical that you prime that pump, that you make sure your issue is prime time ready before you really start to spend the money with the legislators in an intensity. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't be developing those relationships all along, because those relationships are critical to have. But hiring a lobbyist to do that is a very different thing than the organization and its members, who are the actual constituents, being the people that are delivering that message to those recipients.
Then the time that you have with that lobbyist and the money that you're spending on that lobbyist becomes more effective, right? Because you've done all of that pump priming, right?
Absolutely.
And you now have a much better idea, because the reality is, even if you do a really good job building your advocacy organization, you're not going to be able to get to every legislator, right? I mean, that's the way of the world for every organization, every corporation. But you want to make sure that you understand where you're strong, where you're weak, and where that lobbyist is going to have the biggest impact.
That's a great point. And we have a tendency where I work at HillStaffer to address the issues, manage the issues, and help our clients understand that some issues are not quite ready for prime time. So let's work on the things that are ready, and they're ready because we help make them ready. But the other thing also that's important to remember is that issues come and go, and that every day something could change. Now, the last piece of this, I think, which is really important, and you brought this up, Mike, is who do you talk to? I have a tendency to divide my legislators, if that's who my target is, when the two chambers, I divide them into quarters. And I say, here's the top 25% who are or could be our champions. Based on where they are. There's the bottom 25% who will probably never support us. So I say to you, don't waste the money, don't waste the time with those people. Okay. Send them something if you want by email, but really don't bother spending your expensive lobbyist time with that.
Right.
And especially if they're not in areas where they have a significant number of your constituents. That middle 50% is where you need to spend your time. Now, your top 25% continue to need your love and support and their thank yous, but it's the middle 50 that are the ones that can help become supporters, champions, or go in the other direction. Those, to me, are the ones you work the hardest.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Well, thank you so much, Anne, for taking all the time to work through this question. I think you've done a great job of helping our audience understand all to my relatively simple question about how advocacy fits in with lobbying and public affairs. This question has a lot of layers to it. And you have to make sure, as an organization looking at your entire program, that you're answering each of those questions so that you're spending your resources wisely and making your case to everybody who needs to hear your message. So thank you again for your time.
Thank you, Mike. And I hope that some people take away the lessons we've tried to convey. Thank you for doing this.
Thank you.